Hi, friends. It's been a little while. I'm trying to get on here about once a week nowadays, if I can. But I recently went on a trip to Indonesia where I spent about a couple weeks in the capital, Jakarta. And I wanted to talk about Jakarta today because it's not as popular of an option. And there's probably different reasons for that. But, when you compare it to other places in Southeast Asia, say Bangkok, Saigon, Hanoi, Manila, other places like that. KL, I can't leave out KL, and Singapore, which is on a different category, sort of thing. Not really for digital nomads, but um, it's not as well traversed or talked about, or in forums and discussions and such. So I wanted to add a little bit to that small discussion and perhaps shine some light on as to why it's not as popular of an option as some of its regional neighbors. But yeah, so during those 2 weeks, I actually was making a little list. And it's always fascinating because when you go somewhere new, you just notice all these small and different things. So it would totally be something that a local or someone who lives there does not even register. But to you, even if it's just a 1 or 2% difference, you're like, huh, that's different than what I expected or what I'm used to, or whatever your personal standard is, depending on where you're from. So I got 25 here, and I want to go through them. The way that you enter buildings in Jakarta is different than many places I've been to. If you're at like a mall and the shape of the mall is, let's just say, a rectangular prism, there might be two entrances and exits on each of the long sides, and then one on the short sides each. So you could easily have six different entries and exits in a normal mall. However, that is not the case in Jakarta. Like, I swear, you could have a huge mall there, and everyone has to get funneled in through like one side, through one particular exit and entry point, and it could be far away. You could have to walk around roads and like blocks and stuff, and it can be a real hassle sometimes. Actually, if you don't know, it can double your commute time. So that's one peculiar thing that I noticed while I was there, and it ties into the next point that I put on here, which is higher security. Even just walking into any old mall, you'll have security checks. They might scan you like a metal detector. There's definitely security guards there, so you will notice a higher security presence in Jakarta, definitely, than anywhere else that you may be accustomed to. Not anywhere else. Like, you haven't been everywhere, right? But I will say my reference point is typically Bangkok, Thailand in general, which is where I've been staying the last 10 years. And before that, the US, and I've lived, worked, and studied multiple years in China as well. So I'm familiar with a few different places, but those are my more prominent metrics, reference points. The next one I put on here is honking. I know some people are quite sensitive to honking and it drives them crazy. But when you're in Jakarta, there's a lot of honking. It's not the honkiest place you've been to. I mean, Vietnam and India probably takes the cake. But there's a lot of honking. You will not go more than a few seconds without hearing a honk when you're walking down the streets and stuff. So be prepared for that if you're the type of person who is sensitive to honking. Because yeah, if it's a few honks, if it's a minute or two or an hour throughout the day, okay, no big deal. But it'll just wear on you because it's constant. And depending on where you're staying, you might be able to hear it where you're staying. And that's the second hotel that I stayed at, which was a Holiday Inn Express. I could hear the honking like basically all the time, a faint honking in the background because I was near a very busy street. And in the mornings, I would be woken up by it. So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of street noise. You could call it noise pollution. But, there's the same thing in Bangkok where they have these super loud, obnoxious motorbikes that are just ramming down the freeway and screeching and echoes. And like, it should be illegal. That is total, absolute noise pollution. But they have even more of that in Jakarta. So that's just another part of the elements that gives Jakarta like this feeling it'll just grind you down. It's just one of those big cities with all this kind of madness going on around you. The next one I put in here is cuteness slash innocence. Now, I didn't fully elaborate on this when I wrote it down, but I feel like because there's less international influence there, the people behave in and they act in more of like their own way, basically. They're not influenced. They're not looking to the side and seeing how other people do things. They have their own way of doing things. So I thought that was interesting to see. And the way I described it was like a cuteness and innocence of not trying to copy, emulate, take pieces, bits, pages, and stuff from other people. They're doing their own thing, and it has a certain feeling to it. The next one I put in here is traffic officers, which I've heard of them before. I had not seen them in person, but that one was interesting because you just have like some guys outside all day, who knows how long, how many hours, and it gets hot in Jakarta. And they're basically just directing traffic. And from what I heard online, these guys aren't even official employees of the government or anything. They're not on some sort of payroll. I guess they operate on tips. So some of the drivers, when they're going by, I don't know, maybe they'll give them a 5,000 or 1,000. I'm not sure how much you would give someone for a service like that, which is just a few seconds, but yeah, so that's how it works. And they're just getting paid off of tips, but it's very peculiar. It's not like a typical traffic cop that you might see in a Western country who's wearing like white gloves and a hat and pointing and with a whistle and other equipment. No, these are just, dudes, the guy who lives next door near that intersection in his sandals, and his brother and stuff like that. So that is very unique and peculiar variation of a traffic officer in Jakarta. Micro trains is what they call them. These are basically like vans, and I was like Googling how to get somewhere, and it said get on this bus. It labeled it, indicated it as a bus. When the thing showed up, it was basically like a van and not a big van. It's not even like one of those Toyota commuter vans for 12 people. It's just like a normal van, which you would typically put, two in the front, and then you have two rows of three people each. So 8 people total kind of van. And it was a squeeze. And I've gotten into very local transportation here in Bangkok, like the Songtao. They have a very small version in some places around Thailand and Bangkok, especially, that just have two small rows in an open air, like red kind of car thing. But this was even tighter. So you have to get comfortable being next to just total strangers, which is it just feels different when you're obviously a foreigner and you can't read and understand much that's going on around you, and you're just in there like shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of locals. It's not a form of transportation that visitors typically take, especially foreign Western foreigners. But I like to be a little adventurous and take public transport from time to time, not the whole time, because by the end I was only doing taxis like the last 5 days anywhere I went. But at least in the beginning, just to get a feel of the place, to see what the day-to-day life is like. And I would not have known that I needed to take taxis if I didn't spend the first amount of time, the first half or the first 2/3, testing out the public transport and actually seeing firsthand how much of a grind it is. Now, if I was in a different place, like let's say Barcelona or somewhere else with like a nice, smooth transportation system, then there would be no point in the trip where I feel the need to, be taking taxis everywhere. But you wouldn't know that until you actually go in firsthand and check it out. Next thing I put in here is long trains. There are some super long trains in Jakarta. They remind me of like Japan style length. Just the number of cars when a train comes is like you can't even count. It's just zooming by and like like dozens of cars on a single train. So yeah, they are loads. And there's another point that I put in here, which is just an indication of the number of people, the density, the large population of Indonesia in general, but of course the capital Jakarta and largest city in particular. And yeah, it just reminded me this is definitely the fourth largest country by population in the world. And number three, for example, the US is just a much bigger landmass. So to have anywhere near that amount of people in a much smaller place, the density, and you're going to feel the number of people there a little bit more than a place like the US. Taxis, I put here, I don't even remember what point I was making on that. Maybe it's an incomplete point. I saw a lot of signs that said no pork and no lard. So that's very prominent at many different restaurants. Of course, I think it's more specific to, Muslims and their eating patterns. But I thought that was, peculiar. It jumps out at you. Just another, as I like to call, a culture bite, because just these little tidbits of things that are, indicative or representative of their culture and how they do things differently. Cost of living incredibly low in Indonesia. and incredibly low in Jakarta. Some of the services I saw there, and the other thing that adds to the confusion is the exchange rate is like a super high number. But some of the services I saw there, like you could, if there's like a little mom and pop laundry shop on the side of the road, I mean, you can get like laundry done there for like 50 cents a kilo or $1 a kilo would be like plenty of a budget. It would be less than that. So, like, yeah, some of the stuff you can find there is incredibly inexpensive. I will say, which is another point I put on here, the quality of the products and services is a different thing, though, and perhaps somewhat indicative of the price you pay. It's more like you get what you pay for there, definitely. Women's only train. When I got on the train once, it was quite awkward. But it happens, and I think they forgive me because I'm obviously don't know what I'm doing there. I was running to get on the train right before it leaves, and I jumped in the door and I was just chilling there. I saw an open seat and I walked back and I sat in it, and quickly someone came over and they're like, no, 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 no. It wasn't like a soft or friendly like, hey, you can't see. It was like, oh, no, 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 no. You're like, what are you doing? But it wasn't too mean, right? So it's not like it stuck with me or anything. And then I looked around and I realized, wow, there's no males on this car. And the seat color was different. So I guess if I was being observant, or if I had at least known that, women only cars exist there on the metro in Jakarta, I would have had an eye out for it. But yeah, I basically got shooed away quickly. And it's funny, of course, because, everyone's looking at you like, who is this guy? So I walked over to the next train, and there was guys in there, and there was no problem. But be aware of that. And it was the car on the very end. So I haven't seen that many of them, but I think if there is a women's only car, it'll be like on the very end, not somewhere in the middle. So be aware of that. What else do I got here? I put chivalry with a question mark because this observation that I made, I'm not certain about it. But on one of the trains I was on, I saw multiple people get up to offer their seat to someone else. And it wasn't like the person that they were offering the seat to was like really old or disabled. It was always like a guy offering his seat to a girl. And I saw that like 3 times in one metro car I was sitting on. And I almost like was going to get up and give my seat to, any girl who was standing. But I did see one other guy who was sitting down, and it was mostly girls sitting. Again, I think this may have been a coincidence. I don't think it's any kind of hard and fast rule, but I did think it was interesting and noteworthy that it seems like chivalry there, or at least in that sense of giving up your seat to a girl, and not because she's old or pregnant or anything, just a normal girl, seemed to be like a thing there. So yeah, you guys, if you know, let me know. Getting around town, I would say, is quite difficult in Jakarta. Like the metro system is not that expansive there. It's not at all a surprise if the place that you're staying is quite far from the metro station, and if the metro line that you initially get on is not the one that you end on, meaning you need to do a transfer. So yeah, getting around town was tough in Jakarta. It is not easy, and does not so it doesn't get a lot of points of ease when it comes to getting around town. Next thing I put on here, lower quality of products and services. So because the price of some things is very low, so is the quality, and especially with the food. Some of the food there that I ate, I was like, what am I eating? Like some of the beef steaks and stuff that I ordered. At some point, I was just ordering like a bunch of quote unquote Wagyu cuts at some burger place that I found that I really like called Five Monkeys. But yeah, I don't think it was real Wagyu. I mean, it could have been. It just seemed like normal beef. And then what they were charging for the normal beef seemed like some very low grade beef or something. So yeah, that was one thing you have to look out for there. Um, yeah, and then once you're eating at like these nice high end places, I mean, you're not really saving any money there. You're just paying similar to international Western typical prices, but that's fine. You're getting like a nicer experience, I suppose, and you're at like a more upscale place. Dinner during Ramadan is the next thing I wrote, which I found to be very difficult. A lot of the places were packed. I mean, I guess I should have known. I just didn't really have an idea of how busy it would be because it's not like I typically live in a Muslim country, especially during Ramadan. So many of the places I went to, they would just outright refuse me. And it's not like they were refusing me for no reason. It's just they were fully booked. They had reservations throughout the evening. They wouldn't even put me on a wait list. They were like, "No, we're just done. We're not even taking names. Like, sorry, you got to go somewhere else." And sometimes, like, I found that out when I would be like, "How long do I have to wait?" And they're like, "Nah, there's no waiting in this situation, sir. Sorry." They're very nice though. Like I put, they're very like cutesy and polite about it. So that is one thing I liked about Jakarta. It's like I didn't have any problems there with anyone, which you would think with such like a rough and jagged city, you might run into some friction or I don't know, just negative personalities. But I was there for nearly 2 weeks, and I think that's a good indicator. It's not like mostly people would just kind of leave you alone, or like officers, and they wouldn't like be trying to impose these unknown or unnecessary rules on you, things like that. So yeah, but the restaurants was they were jam packed during Ramadan, and that's another thing I put on here is that sometimes there's no wait list. They'll just say no, you can't come in. English level, which is an important one, I think, for international people to be aware of, is quite low in Jakarta. I would have thought it'd be higher just because, based on the few Indonesian people that I've met throughout the years, they all have relatively good English. But again, that's a very self-selective subset of Indonesian people. But yeah, the actual English level of locals there is surprisingly low. So yeah, Thailand is much higher, and Thailand's level is not really that high if you compare it to European countries and stuff. So I mean, I guess for Asia, Thailand is kind of good. It's not like Singapore or uh, the Philippines or even Hong Kong or something, but it's on the upper end, the upper half. And Indonesia is significantly lower than here. Pricing is one thing I put on here, and I noticed this as soon as I got to the airport at the Soekarno Hatta airport. Hoping I said that closer. I've made progress in the pronunciation, but yeah, I ordered something. Let's say it was like 100,000 or 90,000, and then when I get the bill, it's significantly higher. Like I'm double checking it. Like, did they add something to the bill, or did I forget something that I put on the bill? But you'll easily get like a 20% upcharge once the taxes and service fees and stuff are put in there. There's no tipping, but I guess it's already built in with the service charge, right? But yeah, you can easily go up 20% on what you think you might be paying at any like sit down kind of restaurant. And even some places that aren't sit down, they might, yeah, they still have to charge some 10% government tax. Smoking, which for me is kind of bothersome. There was a lot of smoking there. It's people smoking everywhere. If you go to any kind of nightlife place, there's a lot of smoking going on. I even saw a guy smoking in a mall, and I was like, what? This guy was just coming up the escalator, taking a puff, and just smoke going everywhere, secondhand smoke. And there was clothes around. It was like a clothing kind of floor. I was like, what is this? Feels like China back in the day where people would just smoke whenever, wherever. I don't give who's around me. Second, I don't care about their lungs. So it wasn't like a swanky mall, but it was still a mall. It was just one of those normal ones, more local neighborhood ones. But it was a large mall with escalators, multiple floors, huge sections, etc. So yeah, if you don't like smoke like me, you might find yourself bothered there from time to time by that. Next one, rough and disorganized, which is at least part of a fair way to describe Jakarta. It is a large, rough, and somewhat disorganized place. I'll give you one concrete example. When you're going through the metro, some of the turnstiles, you swipe your card on the left, and you push the turnstile that is to the right of it. But in some stations, you swipe your card on the right side, and then you push to the left of the where you swiped your card, which doesn't make sense and just totally boggles the mind, right? Like, have some uniformity in there. I don't know like how or why, or they didn't even care when they were installing some things, and they're just, yeah, it's backward or reversed opposite in some places, which is not a huge deal, but it still stands out. It's like, why is it like this? And why didn't they bother to fix it? But probably some things they don't deem as necessary to be fixed, whereas in other places, if that was the case, they would change it. You could say fix it, but they're not so much. Loose with change and rounding. I noticed, yeah, if you're giving change, because the denominations are so high, if you're off by like 500 or 1,000, they might just be like, whatever, because they don't oftentimes have change. Like many of the drivers and delivery people, they don't have the appropriate amount of change. Even some stores, like they'll have to send someone to go run outside to a neighboring shop to get change. So yeah, they're loose with the rounding and numbers, and probably just me because I was just doing cash. I know they have like a QR payment method there that locals mostly use, so you don't have to worry about change. But if you are paying with cash and if you're a foreigner there, then yeah, that's one thing you'll notice. Parking fee trick. I used a lot of rideshare apps while I was there. This one's a little bit annoying because to enter some places, they have a parking fee, and it'll be like, let's just say 5,000. Which, how much was that? I don't know. It's like 30 cents US cents. Um, the thing is, I found out afterwards that some places, if you're only in there for 5 or 10 minutes, they will not charge you this fee. However, the driver will ask you, "Hey, are you okay with this 5,000 thing fee?" And I guess they need to get permission from you or some sort of, verbal authorization or something. And you're like, "Yeah, okay, sure." And then, but actually, like, I don't even think the driver paid it. He just pocketed this little, like, basically a quarter, and I'm like, do I even care, like, if he's getting one over on me for 30 cents? No, but still, in principle, it's kind of annoying, or just, it's just something to look out for. No one likes being gypped, even if it is for such a small amount. I don't know, just barely worth thinking about, but still, it's just the feeling that's worth more than the actual denomination. The next thing I wrote about was on the benches, because in the subways in Jakarta, the bench is completely flat. In many other places where one person is supposed to sit, there will be like a dip or a mold. So that person's butt is supposed to go into that part, into that seat. But over there, there's no lines like delineating where a seat starts and ends. There's no dip. It's just a flat, uniform bench. And basically, there's no limit, upper or lower, on who or how many people can sit on this bench. And people will squeeze in, surprisingly. I remember, like, one time a girl, she wanted to sit next to her friend, and there was a small gap there of maybe half a person, and she basically just sat on the edge of the bench, and she was definitely making contact with me. Like, her leg was definitely touching my leg. But yeah, so just be ready for that. Some people, they'll squeeze in, and there might be extra space, there might be less space, depending on who feels like sitting down and if they're friend, etc. But I thought that was interesting. Last one that I have here is the maximum ATM withdrawal limit on some places is ridiculously low. The last withdrawal that I did, they were like a maximum 2 million Indonesian rupiah, which sounds like a high number, but in reality, it was only like 120 US dollars. And I said, what? This is the maximum? So of course I took the maximum. I ended up using credit cards most of the places I went to after that, and I didn't spend it all. But still, if you're paying cash, or if you're like a person who likes to spend cash, the withdrawal limits are incredibly low. I have never seen somewhere with a withdrawal maximum limit of like a little over 100 US dollars. Like, I don't, that's not a lot of money. But maybe, I mean, I don't know how much people there make on just a local person working at a typical retail shop, but maybe that's half of their monthly salary or something. I don't know, but I don't know how they pegged that number, how they came up with it. Not that I'm supposed to, but just be aware, it is really low. The other ATM I went to was 3 million, so 180 US dollars roughly. But yeah, the average of $150, as low as a little over 100, is surprisingly low. Caught me a little off guard, but it's not like it hurt my trip, but it's something you'll notice for sure. So yeah, guys, those are the 25, maybe 24 culture bites that I had about a recent trip to Jakarta. If you're thinking about going there, um, I would recommend it lightly. I think it's a place worth checking out. It's interesting to see a different, Southeast Asian capital, large urban center, especially if you haven't been there before. So I feel like after going there, I'm a slightly more well-rounded, let's just say, resident of Southeast Asia. Having been to Manila, okay, Shanghai and Beijing, those are not in Southeast Asia, but still part of East Asia. now Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Saigon, of course, Bangkok, and other places. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting place. It's worth seeing. But yeah, I don't think it'll be a hotspot because these places like Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur are probably more comfortable for international people. But yeah, in the meantime, it's still an option. So if you guys have any questions about the place, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, all in all, it was a good time. As far as the people, I think they were just fine. I had, a good time. There were some spots here and there. I shared some laughs and whatnot. I actually got my hair color changed over there. So that was probably like the most interaction I had with people there because, this process of changing the hair color for me, since I have such dark black hair, 2 bleaching rounds and plus the color took like 5 hours. But yeah, it was nice. So that's about it, guys. That's my trip to Jakarta. I went there to get the destination Thailand visa, which I obtained successfully. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video. But other than that, hey, you guys take care and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.